Every hardship placed upon my path deposited unseen strength within me. Every disappointment sharpened my judgment. Every moment of fear revealed the areas where faith must grow. Every fall refined my endurance. Spiritual economy wastes nothing. Even my deepest wounds became instruments of my ascent. Infinite intelligence shapes a chosen man not through ease but through adversity. Ease makes a man soft. Adversity makes a man capable. When life intends to use a man as a pillar for others, it pours weight upon him early. This is why the strongest child often grows under the sternest household, and the wisest adult often rises from the darkest beginning. The universe does not place heavy burdens on the unprepared. It places them on the chosen. I began to repeat this to myself daily. I am not cursed by what I carry. I am strengthened by what I was chosen to lift. I repeated it until the truth became the marrow of my bones. I repeated it until the fear dissolved and the dignity rose. Let me elaborate on this profound principle of spiritual economy, because understanding it can transform how you view every challenge, setback, and hardship you face. For years, I had seen my struggles as wasted time, wasted effort, wasted life. I had viewed my failures as evidence of incompetence, my disappointments as reasons to despair, my hardships as burdens to be endured. But I came to understand that in the spiritual economy of the universe, nothing is wasted. Every hardship placed upon my path deposited unseen strength within me. Every financial challenge I faced developed my resourcefulness. Every moment of scarcity deepened my appreciation for abundance. Every failure taught me valuable lessons. Every setback refined my strategy. Every disappointment sharpened my judgment. Every moment of fear revealed the areas where faith must grow. Every fall refined my endurance. Spiritual economy wastes nothing. Even my deepest wounds became instruments of my ascent. The pain of my family's financial struggles became the motivation for my transformation. The embarrassment of my financial mistakes became the humility to seek guidance. The frustration of my limitations became the creativity to find new solutions. The loneliness of my journey became the intimacy with divine guidance. Infinite intelligence shapes a chosen man not through ease but through adversity. Ease makes a man soft. Adversity makes a man capable. Comfort leads to complacency. Challenge leads to growth. Security breeds stagnation. Uncertainty breeds innovation. The path of least resistance rarely leads to the greatest destinations. The road of greatest challenge often leads to the most significant growth. When life intends to use a man as a pillar for others, it pours weight upon him early. This is why the strongest child often grows under the sternest household, and the wisest adult often rises from the darkest beginning. The weight you carry is not a curse. It's preparation. The challenges you face are not obstacles. They're training. The hardships you endure are not punishments. They're refinements. The universe does not place heavy burdens on the unprepared. It places them on the chosen. The very fact that you feel the weight is evidence that you have the strength to carry it. The very fact that you face the challenges is proof that you have the capacity to overcome them. The very fact that you endure the hardships is a sign that you're being prepared for something greater. I began to repeat this to myself daily. I am not cursed by what I carry. I am strengthened by what I was chosen to lift. This affirmation became a powerful tool in transforming my perspective on my struggles. It helped me see that the weight I carried was not a burden to be resented, but a selection to be honored. It helped me understand that the challenges I faced were not obstacles to be feared, but opportunities to be embraced. It helped me recognize that the hardships I endured were not punishments, but preparations to be completed. I repeated it until the truth became the marrow of my bones. I repeated it until it shaped my identity, guided my decisions, influenced my actions. I repeated it until the fear dissolved and the dignity rose. Let me share with you a specific experience that deepened my understanding of spiritual economy. A few years into my journey of financial transformation, I faced a major setback. I had been making significant progress, paying off debt, increasing my income, building savings. Then I was laid off from my job, my primary source of income. To make matters worse, This happened during an economic downturn, making it difficult to find new employment. In the immediate aftermath, I was devastated. All the progress I had made seemed to be undone. The financial security I had begun to build was suddenly threatened. The future I had been working toward suddenly seemed uncertain. I felt like I was back at square one, or even worse. But as I prayed and reflected on this situation, I began to see it through the lens of spiritual economy. I realized that this setback was not a detour from my path, but part of the path itself. It was not a reversal of my progress, but a refinement of my strategy. It was not a punishment for my mistakes, but a preparation for my next level of growth. This challenge forced me to diversify my income streams, something I had been planning to do but hadn't implemented yet. It pushed me to develop skills I had been meaning to acquire but hadn't prioritized. It required me to tap into networks I had been cultivating but not fully utilizing. It demanded that I trust in divine provision rather than just my own efforts. In the months that followed, I not only recovered from this setback, but emerged stronger than before. I created multiple streams of income that provided greater security than my previous job had offered. I developed new skills that opened up new opportunities. I built deeper relationships that led to unexpected collaborations. I deepened my faith in ways that enriched every area of my life. What had seemed like a major setback became a significant setup for my next level of growth. The hardship I had initially resented became a catalyst for transformation. The challenge I had feared became a channel for blessing. The weight I had been crushed by became the very thing that lifted me higher. This experience taught me that spiritual economy is not just a principle, but a practice. It's not just something that happens to you, but something you participate in. It's not just about recognizing that nothing is wasted, but about actively seeking the growth, wisdom, and strength embedded in every challenge. I began to practice spiritual economy deliberately, asking myself with every hardship, what is this teaching me? How is this strengthening me? What is this preparing me for? This practice transformed my relationship with adversity, turning it from an enemy to be feared into an ally to be embraced. I also learned that spiritual economy operates on a different timeline than our immediate expectations. The benefits of our struggles may not be immediately apparent. The growth that comes from our challenges may not be instantly visible. The strength that develops through our hardships may not be immediately recognizable. But in the fullness of time, in the broader perspective of our journey, we begin to see how nothing is wasted, how every experience contributes to our development, how every challenge plays a role in our transformation. This understanding of spiritual economy gave me a new perspective on my entire journey, including the generational patterns I was working to break. I began to see that the struggles of my ancestors were not wasted either. Their hardships, their limitations, their sacrifices had all played a role in bringing me to this moment, to this awareness, to this calling. Their journey had prepared the way for mine, even if they couldn't see it at the time. I also realized that my own struggles were not just for my benefit, but for the benefit of future generations. The strength I developed through my challenges would become part of the inheritance I passed down. The wisdom I gained through my hardships would become part of the legacy I left behind. The resilience I built through my setbacks would become part of the foundation I established for those who would come after me. This is the beauty of spiritual economy. It connects our individual experiences to the larger story of our lineage. It transforms our personal struggles into generational blessings. It turns our individual journey into a collective transformation. I am not cursed by what I carry. I am strengthened by what I was chosen to lift. The weight I carry is not a burden to be resented, but a selection to be honored. The challenges I face are not obstacles to be feared, but opportunities to be embraced. The hardships I endure are not punishments to be endured, but preparations to be completed. In the spiritual economy of the universe, nothing is wasted. Every hardship deposits unseen strength. Every disappointment sharpens judgment. Every moment of fear reveals areas where faith must grow. Every fall refines endurance. Even our deepest wounds become instruments of our ascent. This understanding doesn't eliminate the pain of our struggles, but it gives them purpose. It doesn't remove the difficulty of our challenges, but it gives them meaning. It doesn't erase the hardship of our journey, but it gives it significance. And in that purpose, meaning, and significance, we find the strength to persevere, the wisdom to grow, and the grace to transform. Embracing your calling. The transformation of identity as I embrace this identity. Others noticed the change even before I spoke a word. They sensed steadiness in my presence, a quiet conviction shaping my eyes, a calmness governing my decisions. They didn't know why, but they felt it. A man who understands his calling radiates a dignity that cannot be mimicked. It is the dignity of one who has stopped questioning his worth. When I accepted that my struggle was sacred, I stopped envying others. I stopped fearing the future. I stopped resenting my past. I began to recognize that everything that once felt hostile was actually guiding me toward mastery. I began to walk as one who belongs to his purpose, and life began to respect me the moment I respected my assignment. Let me take you deeper into this transformation of identity. Because embracing your calling is not just about understanding it intellectually, but embodying it completely. The shift from seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances to a chosen one with a sacred assignment is one of the most profound transformations you can experience. It changes not just how you see yourself, but how others see you. Not just how you approach challenges, but how you navigate life itself. When I first began to understand that my financial struggles were not random or meaningless, but part of a divine calling, it was primarily an intellectual realization. I could articulate the concept, explain the principles, even teach others about it. But there was a gap between my understanding and my embodiment, between my knowledge and my identity. Closing that gap required a deliberate process of embracing my calling, of integrating it into every aspect of my being, of allowing it to shape not just what I did, but who I was. This process involves several key elements that I want to share with you in the hope that they might help you embrace your own calling more fully. The first element was what I call sacred reframing, viewing every aspect of my journey through the lens of purpose. Instead of seeing my financial struggles as punishments, I began to see them as preparations. Instead of viewing my challenges as obstacles, I began to view them as opportunities. Instead of interpreting my hardships as setbacks, I began to interpret them as setups. This reframing transformed my relationship with my circumstances, turning what had once felt hostile into something that was guiding me toward mastery. The second element was what I call identity integration, allowing my understanding of my calling to shape my self-concept. I began to see myself not just as someone struggling financially, but as the chosen one called to break generational curses. I began to identify not just with my current circumstances, but with my ultimate destiny. I began to define myself not by my limitations, but by my potential. This integration of calling into identity gave me a new sense of dignity, a new confidence, a new way of being in the world. The third element was what I call purpose alignment, making decisions and taking actions in alignment with my calling. I began to ask myself with every choice, is this in alignment with my calling to break generational curses? Does this move me closer to fulfilling my purpose? This alignment brought clarity to my decision-making, focus to my efforts, and effectiveness to my actions. It helped me prioritize what truly mattered and let go of what didn't serve my higher purpose. The fourth element was what I call divine dependence, recognizing that I couldn't fulfill my calling in my own strength. Deeper relationship with the divine, seeking guidance, wisdom, and empowerment beyond my human capabilities. This dependence didn't weaken me, it strengthened me. It didn't limit me, it expanded me. It didn't hinder me, it accelerated my progress. As I went through this process of embracing my calling, something remarkable began to happen. Others noticed the change even before I spoke a word. They sensed steadiness in my presence, a quiet conviction shaping my eyes, a calmness governing my decisions. They didn't know why, but they felt it. A man who understands his calling radiates a dignity that cannot be mimicked. It is the dignity of one who has stopped questioning his worth. It's the confidence of someone who knows they're on the right path, even when that path is challenging. It's the peace of someone who trusts in a higher purpose, even when circumstances are difficult. It's the strength of someone who is anchored in something greater than themselves, even when storms arise. When I accepted that my struggle was sacred, I stopped envying others. I no longer compared my journey to theirs. Recognizing that we each have our own path, our own purpose, our own timing, I stopped fearing the future, trusting that the same divine guidance that had brought me this far would continue to lead me forward. I stopped resenting my past, understanding that even the mistakes and failures had played a role in bringing me to this moment of awareness and purpose. I began to recognize that everything that once felt hostile was actually guiding me toward mastery. The financial challenges were teaching me principles of wealth creation. The limitations were developing my creativity. The setbacks were refining my strategy. The hardships were strengthening my character. The struggles were deepening my faith. I began to walk as one who belongs to his purpose. There was a sense of rightness, of alignment, of being in the right place at the right time, even when circumstances were difficult. There was a sense of flow, of ease, of momentum, even when the path was challenging. There was a sense of meaning, of significance, of contribution, even in the midst of struggle. And life began to respect me the moment I respected my assignment. Opportunities began to open up. Resources began to flow. Connections began to form. It wasn't that life became easy or free of challenges. It was that I began to navigate life with a new authority, a new confidence, a new effectiveness. I began to attract what I needed rather than chase what I wanted. I began to create possibilities rather than just react to circumstances. I began to shape my reality rather than just be shaped by it. Let me share with you a specific experience that illustrates this transformation. About a year into my journey of embracing my calling, I was invited to speak at a community event about financial literacy. This was significant for several reasons. First, I had never spoken publicly before. Second, I still felt like I had more to learn than to teach. Third, I was still in the process of transforming my own financial situation. In the past, I would have declined such an invitation, feeling unqualified and unprepared. But this time, something was different. I recognized that this invitation was not just a random opportunity, but in alignment with my calling. I understood that teaching others was part of how I would break generational curses, not just for my family, but for my community. I realized that sharing my journey with all its struggles and lessons was part of my purpose. So I accepted the invitation, despite my fear and insecurity. I prepared diligently, not just by gathering information, but by connecting with my calling, by drawing on my experiences, by seeking divine guidance. When the day came, I stood before the audience with a new sense of authority. Not because I had all the answers, but because I was fulfilling my assignment. To my surprise, the presentation went well. People were engaged, inspired, and eager to learn more. Several approached me afterward, asking for guidance, sharing their own struggles, expressing gratitude for my transparency. What struck me most was that they weren't just interested in the financial principles I shared. They were drawn to the sense of purpose and possibility that radiated from me. That experience marked a significant shift in my journey. It was the first time I had publicly owned my calling, the first time I had stepped into the role of the chosen one in a visible way. And it opened up new opportunities, new connections, new possibilities that I couldn't have imagined before. This is what happens when you embrace your calling. You begin to operate in a new dimension of authority and effectiveness. You begin to attract opportunities aligned with your purpose. You begin to impact others in ways you never expected. You begin to fulfill your assignment in ways beyond your natural capabilities. A man who understands his calling radiates a dignity that cannot be mimicked. It is the dignity of one who has stopped questioning his worth. When you accept that your struggle is sacred, you stop envying others. You stop fearing the future. You stop resenting your past. You begin to recognize that everything that once felt hostile is actually guiding you toward mastery. You begin to walk as one who belongs to his purpose. Life begins to respect you the moment you respect your assignment. This transformation of identity is not just about feeling better about yourself or having more confidence. It's about stepping into the role you were created to play, fulfilling the purpose you were designed to fulfill, breaking the patterns you were chosen to break. It's about becoming the person who can transform not just your own life, but the lives of generations to come. Breaking financial chains, identity before fortune. I realized that breaking the financial chains of my lineage began not with money, but with identity. I couldn't lift my family if I still saw myself as the one who needed to be lifted. I couldn't lead them if I saw myself as a follower. I couldn't instruct them if I remained trapped in the old beliefs they passed to me. Identity had to rise before fortune could rise. The first step in my transformation was not action, but realization. I had to see myself as the one appointed. I had to feel the weight with reverence instead of fear. I had to let the burden become my badge. When I did this, I broke the first link of the generational chain, the chain of ignorance, the chain of invisibility, the chain of self-doubt. A man cannot correct what he does not acknowledge. And now I acknowledge the truth. My struggle was proof of my calling. Let me take you deeper into this profound realization that identity must rise before fortune can rise. Because understanding and applying this principle is essential to breaking generational financial curses. For years, I had believed that the key to financial transformation was external: more income, better opportunities, favorable circumstances. But I came to understand that the real key is internal: a shift in identity, transformation of self-concept, a redefinition of who I am. I couldn't lift my family if I still saw myself as the one who needed to be lifted. As long as I identified myself as someone struggling financially, as someone limited by circumstances, as someone victimized by generational patterns, I would continue to experience those realities. My identity was shaping my reality. My self-concept was determining my circumstances. My self-perception was influencing my possibilities. I couldn't lead them if I saw myself as a follower. As long as I saw myself as someone who needed guidance, who was uncertain about the path forward, was looking for others to show me the way, I would continue to follow rather than lead. My leadership potential was limited by my self-perception. My ability to guide others was constrained by my view of myself. My capacity to break patterns was restricted by my identity. I couldn't instruct them if I remained trapped in the old beliefs they passed to me. As long as I operated from the same mindset, the same assumptions, the same limitations that had kept my family bound, I would be unable to offer them a new way of thinking, a new approach to finances, a new possibility for their future. My ability to transform their financial reality was limited by my own financial mindset. Identity had to rise before fortune could rise. This became one of the most powerful principles of my transformation. I realized that my external financial circumstances would never permanently change until my internal identity changed. I understood that my fortune would never rise beyond my self-concept. I recognized that my financial reality would never transform until my identity transformed. The first step in my transformation was not action, but realization. I had to see myself as the one appointed. I had to recognize that I was not just a victim of generational patterns, but the chosen one called to break them. I had to understand that I was not just struggling with financial challenges, but being prepared for a financial breakthrough. I had to acknowledge that I was not just dealing with my own issues, but carrying the hopes of generations. I had to feel the weight with reverence instead of fear. I had to see the burden not as a curse to be resented, but as a calling to be honored. I had to recognize the responsibility not as a pressure to crush me, but as a selection to elevate me. I had to understand the struggle not as a punishment, but as a preparation. I had to let the burden become my badge. I had to wear my struggles as a sign of selection rather than a mark of failure. I had to carry my challenges as evidence of calling rather than proof of inadequacy. I had to bear my hardships as a preparation for purpose rather than a penalty for mistakes. When I did this, I broke the first link of the generational chain, the chain of ignorance, the chain of invisibility, the chain of self-doubt. I broke the chain of ignorance by recognizing that my financial struggles were not random or meaningless, but part of a larger pattern with deeper significance. I broke the chain of invisibility by seeing that I was not just an individual dealing with personal issues, but the chosen one called to transform a lineage. I broke the chain of self-doubt by understanding that I was not struggling because I was inadequate, but because I was being prepared for something greater. A man cannot correct what he does not acknowledge. And now I acknowledge the truth. My struggle was proof of my calling. My financial challenges were not evidence of failure, but preparation for purpose. My limitations were not signs of weakness, but opportunities for growth. My hardships were not punishments, but refinements. Let me share with you a specific practice that helped me transform my identity and break these generational chains. I created what I called an identity declaration, a statement that captured the truth about who I was and what I was called to do. I wrote it out, memorized it, and repeated it daily until it became part of my subconscious mind, till it shaped my self-concept, until it influenced my decisions and actions. My identity declaration went something like this: I am the chosen one, called to break the financial chains of my lineage. I am appointed for this time, this purpose, this transformation. I carry the weight of generations not as a burden but as a badge of selection. I face challenges not as obstacles but as preparations. I endure hardships not as punishments but as refinements. I am not defined by my current circumstances but by my ultimate destiny. I am not limited by my past but prepared for my future. I am not struggling because I'm inadequate but because I'm being equipped for something greater. My struggle is not my curse. It's my calling. My limitations are not my weaknesses. They're my opportunities. My hardships are not my setbacks. They're my setups. I am the bridge between the past and the future, the one who transforms generational curses into generational blessings. I am strong enough, wise enough, and determined enough to fulfill this calling. I am the chosen one, and I will fulfill my destiny. Repeating this declaration daily transformed my identity. It rewired my self-concept. It reshaped my perspective. It realigned my reality. It helped me see myself not as someone struggling with financial issues, but as the chosen one called to break generational patterns. It helped me recognize that my challenges were not obstacles but preparations. It helped me understand that my struggles were not punishments but callings. As my identity transformed, my circumstances began to change. Opportunities opened up that had previously been closed. Resources became available that had previously been hidden. Connections formed that had previously been absent. It wasn't magic or coincidence. It was the natural result of operating from a new identity, from a new self-concept, from a new understanding of who I was and what I was called to do. Identity had to rise before fortune could rise. This principle became foundational to my journey. I learned that my external world would always reflect my internal reality. I discovered that my circumstances would always align with my self-concept. I recognized that my fortune would always rise to the level of my identity. This is why breaking generational financial curses begins not with changing your circumstances, but with transforming your identity. It's not about earning more money, but about becoming the person who can attract and manage wealth. It's not about finding better opportunities, but about becoming the person who recognizes and seizes opportunities. It's not about overcoming external limitations, but about transcending internal limitations. I couldn't lift my family if I still saw myself as the one who needed to be lifted. I couldn't lead them if I saw myself as a follower. I couldn't instruct them if I remained trapped in the old beliefs they passed to me. Identity had to rise before fortune could rise. The first step in my transformation was not action, but realization. I had to see myself as the one appointed. I had to feel the weight with reverence instead of fear. I had to let the burden become my badge. When I did this, I broke the first link of the generational chain, the chain of ignorance, the chain of invisibility, the chain of self-doubt. A man cannot correct what he does not acknowledge. And now I acknowledge the truth. My struggle was proof of my calling. My financial challenges were not evidence of failure, but preparation for purpose. My limitations were not signs of weakness, but opportunities for growth. My hardships were not punishments, but refinements. This transformation of identity is not just about feeling better about yourself or having more confidence. It's about stepping into the role you were created to play, fulfilling the purpose you were designed to fulfill, breaking the patterns you were chosen to break. It's about becoming the person who can transform not just your own life, but the lives of generations to come. Renewing the family mind, the invisible inheritance once this truth settled. I moved to the next stage, the rebuilding of the family mind. I understood that the true inheritance I received was not land, nor savings, nor wealth, but thought. The thoughts of those who came before me lingered like invisible smoke in the rooms of my mind. Their fears whispered through my habits. Their doubts breathed through my hesitation. Their limitations echoed through my decisions. And until I renewed my mind, I would repeat the past without knowing why. Financial bondage does not travel through coins. It travels through beliefs. A father who fears lack raises a son who expects lack. A mother uncertain of her worth raises a daughter who doubts her own. A household that treats money as mystery produces children who walk softly around opportunity. When a family does not understand the laws of wealth, its members remain loyal to the patterns that keep them small. Let me take you deeper into this crucial stage of renewing the family mind, because understanding and transforming this invisible inheritance is essential to breaking generational financial curses. For years, I had focused on external factors: income, expenses, investments, opportunities, believing that these were the primary determinants of financial success. But I came to understand that the real inheritance, the one that truly shapes our financial destiny, is not material, but mental, not tangible, but intangible, not visible, but invisible. I understood that the true inheritance I received was not land, nor savings, nor wealth, but thought. The thoughts of those who came before me lingered like invisible smoke in the rooms of my mind. Their beliefs about money, about success, about what's possible, these had been passed down to me, not through explicit teaching, but through osmosis. Through observation, through the subtle cues and messages I had absorbed growing up, their fears whispered through my habits. The fear of risk, the fear of failure, the fear of not having enough. These fears that had governed my ancestors' financial decisions now influenced mine, often without my conscious awareness. I found myself avoiding opportunities that seemed too risky, holding back from decisions that could lead to growth, operating from a place of scarcity rather than abundance. Their doubts breathed through my hesitation. The doubt that they could achieve financial freedom, the doubt that they could break out of their circumstances, the doubt that they could create a different future. These doubts now manifested in my own hesitation, my own uncertainty, my own reluctance to step into new possibilities. Their limitations echoed through my decisions, the limitations they had accepted as reality, the boundaries they had respected as unchangeable, the constraints they had recognized as absolute. These limitations now echoed through my own decisions, often without my conscious recognition. I found myself making choices based on what seemed realistic, rather than what was possible, on what seemed practical rather than what was visionary. And until I renewed my mind, I would repeat the past without knowing why. I would continue to make the same financial mistakes, follow the same patterns, experience the same limitations. Not because I was destined to, but because I was operating from the same mindset, the same beliefs, the same invisible inheritance. Financial bondage does not travel through coins. It travels through beliefs. The real chains that bind us are not material but mental, not external but internal, not visible but invisible. A father who fears lack raises a son who expects lack. A mother uncertain of her worth raises a daughter who doubts her own. A household that treats money as mystery produces children who walk softly around opportunity. When a family does not understand the laws of wealth, its members remain loyal to the patterns that keep them small. Renewing the family mind became a crucial stage in my transformation. It involved identifying the thoughts, beliefs, and patterns I had inherited, examining them critically, and deliberately replacing them with thoughts, beliefs, and patterns that aligned with financial freedom. It was a process of unlearning as much as learning, of deconstruction as much as construction, of letting go as much as taking on. Let me share with you some specific examples of the invisible inheritance I discovered and how I began to renew my mind in those areas. One of the most powerful inherited beliefs I identified was what I call the scarcity mentality. The belief that there's never enough, that resources are limited, that if someone else has more, it means less for me. This mentality showed up in various ways in my life. I was always afraid of spending money, even on things that would improve my life or increase my earning potential. I saw every purchase as a reduction rather than an investment. I was jealous of others' success, seeing it as a threat rather than an inspiration. I was constantly worried about running out, even when I had enough for my immediate needs. Renewing my mind in this area involved deliberately cultivating an abundance mentality. I started by practicing gratitude for what I had, recognizing that abundance was already present in my life. I began to celebrate others' success, seeing it as proof of what's possible. I started to view money as a tool for creation, not just consumption. I began to look for ways to create value, not just preserve what I had. I repeated affirmations like there is more than enough for everyone, including me, and I live in a universe of infinite abundance. Another inherited belief I identified was what I call the hard work fallacy. The belief that working hard is enough to create wealth. My family prided themselves on being hard workers, and they were. But they never achieved financial freedom because hard work alone is not enough. Wealth is created not just through effort, but through strategy. It's not just through labor, but through leverage. Not just through activity, but through productivity. Renewing my mind in this area involved understanding that working smart is as important as working hard. I began to focus on results, not just hours. I started to look for ways to leverage my time, money, and expertise. I learned to build systems that could generate income even when I wasn't actively working. I shifted from trading time for money to creating value that could multiply. I studied successful people not just to admire their work ethic, but to understand their strategies. A third inherited belief I identified was what I call the risk aversion, the belief that safety is more important than opportunity, that it's better to avoid loss than to pursue gain. This belief kept my family from investing, from starting businesses, from stepping out of their financial comfort zone. They preferred the certainty of small, predictable returns to the possibility of larger, less certain ones. Renewing my mind in this area involved understanding the difference between foolish risks and calculated risks. I learned that all progress involves risk, but not all risks are equal. I began to educate myself about investing, about diversification, about risk management. I started taking small, calculated risks and gradually expanding my comfort zone. I learned to see risk not as something to be avoided, but as something to be managed. I repeated affirmations like I take calculated risks that lead to growth, and I am comfortable with uncertainty, because I trust in divine guidance. Fourth inherited belief I identified was what I call the financial. Silence the belief that money is a taboo subject, that it's inappropriate to talk about finances, that financial matters should be kept private. This silence prevented my family from learning about money, from seeking guidance, from sharing wisdom. It kept us isolated in our financial struggles. Renewing my mind in this area involved opening up conversations about money. I started talking openly with my spouse about our financial goals and challenges. I sought out mentors who could guide me. I joined communities where financial matters were discussed openly. I became willing to ask questions, to admit what I didn't know, to learn from others' experience. I repeated affirmations like I talk openly about money, because knowledge leads to freedom. And I seek guidance because wisdom is more valuable than pride. This process of renewing the family mind was not easy or quick. It involved unlearning beliefs that had been ingrained in me since childhood. It required challenging patterns that had been passed down through generations. It demanded confronting fears that had become part of my identity, but it was essential to breaking generational financial curses. Financial bondage does not travel through coins. It travels through beliefs. The real chains that bind us are not material but mental, not external but internal, not visible but invisible. The true inheritance we receive is not land, nor savings, nor wealth, but thought. And the good news is that just as financial bondage travels through beliefs, so does financial freedom. Just as limitations are passed down through generations, so are possibilities. Just as curses are inherited, so are blessings. By renewing our minds, by transforming our beliefs, by changing our thought patterns, we can break the chains of the past and create a new inheritance for the future. I was the first to awaken because I was the first to question. I looked at my lineage and felt an ache, a sense that something was wrong, that something was missing, that something must change. That ache was not discomfort. It was revelation. It was the soul warning me that the old well had run dry. It was the spirit urging me to dig elsewhere. Renewal begins with dissatisfaction. I thought of the mind as an old well that once held clear water. Over time, leaves, dirt, insects, and decay had filled it. The water was still there, but it was hidden beneath layers of neglect. The family mind was the same. The pure principles of truth lay beneath generations of fear, superstition, silence, and surrender. To renew the mind was not to create new truth, but to uncover old truth buried beneath debris. Let me elaborate on this profound realization that I was the first to awaken because I was the first to question, because understanding this dynamic is crucial to breaking generational patterns. 12:47 p.m., the 12th of December 2025, Sarish, for generations. My family had accepted their financial circumstances as inevitable, their limitations as unchangeable, their struggles as destiny. They had operated from the same mindset, followed the same patterns, made the same choices, without questioning whether there might be another way, another possibility, another reality. But I was different. I couldn't accept the status quo. I couldn't be content with the limitations. I couldn't settle for the patterns that had kept my family bound. I looked at my lineage and felt an ache, a sense that something was wrong, that something was missing, that something must change. That ache was not discomfort. It was revelation. It was the soul warning me that the old well had run dry. It was the spirit urging me to dig elsewhere. It was the calling of destiny inviting me to step into a new possibility. It was the whisper of generations past crying out for a different future. Renewal begins with dissatisfaction. Without dissatisfaction with the current reality, there's no motivation to seek a new one. Without recognition that something is missing, there's no drive to find it. Without awareness that something must change, there's no commitment to 12:48 p.m., the 12th of December, 2025. Sarish, the transformation I was experiencing wasn't just for my benefit. It was for the benefit of future generations. The renewal I was undergoing wasn't just personal. It was generational. The truths I was discovering weren't just for me. They were for my lineage. Let me share with you a specific practice that helped me develop the habit of questioning and renewing my mind. I created what I called a belief audit process, where I would regularly examine my financial beliefs, identify those I had inherited, and deliberately question and replace them. The belief audit process involved several steps. Identification. I would identify a financial belief I held, often by noticing a pattern in my financial behavior or a recurring emotional response to financial situations. Tracing. I would trace this belief back to its origin, asking, where did I learn this? Who taught me this? Is this my belief or someone else's? Questioning. I would question the belief, asking, is this absolutely true? Is there evidence to the contrary? What would be possible if I didn't believe this? Replacement. I would replace the limiting belief with an empowering one, based on truth rather than inheritance, on principle rather than pattern. Reinforcement. I would reinforce the new belief through affirmations, visualization, and action, until it became my new default way of thinking. For example, in one belief audit, I identified the belief, I'm not good with money. Tracing this belief back, I realized I had learned it from my family, who often said things like, we're just not money people. Questioning this belief, I asked, is it absolutely true that I'm not good with money? What evidence do I have to the contrary? What would be possible if I believed I was good with money? Replacing this belief, I adopted the new belief, I am learning to be excellent with money. Reinforcing this belief, I repeated it daily, took financial education courses, and made small but consistent financial decisions that proved this new belief to be true. This belief audit process became a regular practice in my journey of renewing the family mind. It helped me identify inherited beliefs that were holding me back. It helped me question assumptions that had seemed unquestionable. It helped me replace limiting patterns with empowering principles. It helped me renew my mind with truth that aligned with financial freedom. Questioning was the beginning of wealth. Money follows ideas. Ideas follow clarity. Clarity follows renewal. I couldn't produce new results with inherited confusion. I couldn't rise on the wings of borrowed fear. I had to clear the old well and let fresh truth flow again. This was the sacred duty of the chosen man, to rebuild the mind not only for himself, but for all who came after. Deliberate renewal. Replacing old echoes with new commands, every belief had to be examined. Every fear had to be traced to its origin. Every limitation had to be placed under the lamp of reason. If I did not inspect my thoughts, I would live out the desires of those who lived before me, not the destiny created for me. The renewal of the mind was the quiet revolution that would free my family from the chains of yesterday. I understood that I couldn't break a curse with silence. I couldn't break it with hope. I had to break it with understanding. Understanding turns the key. Understanding dissolves the shadow. Understanding opens the gate to abundance. When a man understands the laws of wealth, order, imagination, service, persistence, saving decision, he passes from darkness to light. Let me take you deeper into this process of deliberate renewal. Understanding and applying this approach is essential to breaking generational financial curses. For years, I had operated on autopilot, allowing inherited beliefs and patterns to guide my financial decisions without conscious awareness or critical examination. But I came to understand that true transformation requires deliberate, intentional renewal of the mind. Every belief had to be examined. I couldn't afford to accept any financial belief without scrutiny, without investigation, without verification. I had to ask, is this belief true? Does it serve me? Does it align with the financial reality I want to create? I had to be willing to challenge even the most deeply ingrained beliefs, the ones that seemed most obvious, the ones that had been passed down for generations. Every fear had to be traced to its origin. I couldn't allow financial fears to control my decisions without understanding where they came from, what they were based on, whether they were justified. I had to ask, what is this fear really about? Is it based on reality or on inherited perception? Is it protecting me or limiting me? I had to be willing to face even the most uncomfortable fears. The ones that seemed most justified. The ones that had been validated by experience. Every limitation had to be placed under the lamp of reason. I couldn't accept financial limitations as absolute or unchangeable without questioning their validity, exploring their alternatives, testing their boundaries. I had to ask, is this limitation real or perceived? Is it permanent or temporary? Is it universal or specific? I had to be willing to challenge even the most obvious limitations. It's the ones that seemed most insurmountable, the ones that had been confirmed by repeated experience. If I did not inspect my thoughts, I would live out the desires of those who lived before me, not the destiny created for me. My thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions were the invisible forces shaping my financial reality. If I didn't examine them, if I didn't question them, if I didn't deliberately renew them, I would continue to create the same results my ancestors created, experience the same limitations they experienced, repeat the same patterns they repeated. The renewal of the mind was the quiet revolution that would free my family from the chains of yesterday. It wasn't loud or dramatic or immediately visible. It was subtle, gradual, almost imperceptible at first. But over time, this quiet revolution would transform everything: my decisions, my actions, my results, my reality, my legacy. I understood that I couldn't break a curse with silence. Ignoring the generational patterns wouldn't make them disappear. Pretending the limitations didn't exist wouldn't make them vanish. Hoping for a different result without changing my thinking wouldn't create transformation. I couldn't break it with hope alone. Hope is important, but without understanding and action, it's just wishful thinking. Hope without strategy is powerless. Hope without knowledge is ineffective. Hope without transformation of mindset is temporary. I had to break it with understanding. Understanding the principles that govern wealth creation, understanding the mindset that produces financial freedom, understanding the patterns that perpetuate generational curses, understanding the truth that sets us free. Understanding turns the key. It unlocks the door to new possibilities. It opens the gate to abundance. It reveals the path to transformation. Without understanding, we're locked in the same patterns, trapped in the same limitations, bound by the same curses. Understanding dissolves the shadow. It illuminates the hidden assumptions that shape our reality. It reveals the invisible forces that govern our decisions. It exposes the limiting beliefs that hold us captive. Without understanding, we're operating in darkness, stumbling through the same obstacles, repeating the same mistakes. Understanding opens the gate to abundance. It provides the knowledge needed to create wealth. It offers the wisdom required to manage resources. It gives the insight necessary to recognize opportunities. Without understanding, we're unable to access the abundance that is available to us. When a man understands the laws of wealth, order, imagination, service, persistence, saving decision, he passes from darkness to light. He moves from confusion to clarity, from limitation to possibility, from curse to blessing. He transforms not just his financial circumstances, but his entire reality. Let me share with you a specific practice that helped me engage in this deliberate renewal of the mind. I created what I called a mind transformation system, a structured approach to examining, questioning, and replacing inherited beliefs and patterns. The mind transformation system consisted of several components. The belief inventory, a comprehensive list of all my financial beliefs, categorized into areas like earning, spending, saving, investing, debt, risk, and success. The mind transformation system consisted of several components. The belief inventory, a comprehensive list of all my financial beliefs, categorized into areas like earning, spending, saving, investing, debt, risk, and success. This inventory helped me see the full scope of my inherited mindset. The origin tracing. For each belief, I would trace its origin by asking questions like, where did I learn this? Who taught me this? When did I first adopt this belief? What experiences reinforced it? This helped me understand which beliefs were truly mine and which were inherited. The truth testing. For each belief, I would test its validity by asking questions like, is this absolutely true? Is there evidence to the contrary? Does this belief serve me? Does it align with the financial reality I want to create? This helped me distinguish between inherited limitations and universal truths. The pattern analysis. For each belief, I would analyze how it showed up in my financial behavior by asking questions like, how does this belief influence my financial decisions? What patterns does it create in my financial life? What results does it produce? This helped me see the direct connection between my thoughts and my financial reality. The replacement process for each limiting belief. I would identify an empowering replacement based on truth rather than inheritance, on principle rather than pattern. I would craft this replacement belief carefully, making it positive, present tense, and personal. The reinforcement ritual for each new belief. I would create a reinforcement ritual involving affirmations, visualization, and action. This ritual would be practiced daily until the new belief became my default way of thinking. Let me give you a specific example of how I applied this mind transformation system. One of the beliefs I identified in my belief inventory was, you have to work hard to make money. Tracing its origin, I realized I had learned this from my family, who were all hard workers but never achieved financial freedom. Testing its validity, I asked, is it absolutely true that you have to work hard to make money? Are there people who make money without working hard? What principles do they follow? I realized that while work is important, working smart is more important than working hard. Analyzing its patterns, I saw how this belief led me to focus on hours worked rather than results produced, on effort expended rather than value created. For my replacement belief, I chose I'd create wealth by working smart and creating value. For my reinforcement ritual, I would repeat this belief daily, visualize myself working smart and creating value, and take specific actions aligned with this new belief. This mind transformation system became a powerful tool in my process of deliberate renewal. It helped me examine every belief, trace every fear to its origin, place every limitation under the lamp of reason. It helped me break generational curses with understanding rather than just hope or silence. It helped me pass from darkness to light in my financial mindset. I began to say within myself, the habits of my forefathers end with me. New patterns begin through me. I spoke it as though I were chiseling the statement into stone. I spoke it until the old voice grew faint. I spoke it until the new voice grew strong. Identity is shaped by repetition, and repetition is the secret instrument of rebirth. I had to rehearse new truth with the same devotion my family had rehearsed their fears. They had repeated scarcity. I had to repeat abundance. They had repeated caution. I had to repeat courage. They had repeated hesitation. I had to repeat decision. They had rehearsed survival. I had to rehearse creation. Renewal was the deliberate act of replacing old echoes with new commands. Let me expand on this powerful practice of deliberate repetition, because understanding and applying it is essential to renewing the family mind and breaking generational curses. Our minds are shaped by repetition, the thoughts we think repeatedly, the beliefs we hold consistently, the patterns we follow habitually. These repetitions create neural pathways in our brains, making certain thoughts and behaviors automatic, unconscious, default. My family had, through generations of repetition, created strong neural pathways around scarcity, caution, hesitation, and survival. These pathways had become so ingrained that they operated automatically without conscious awareness. They were the old echoes that shaped their financial reality, the inherited patterns that perpetuated their limitations. To break these generational curses, I couldn't just intellectually understand new principles. I had to create new neural pathways. I couldn't just occasionally think different thoughts. I had to consistently repeat them. I couldn't just occasionally act differently. I had to habitually practice new behaviors. I had to rehearse new truth with the same devotion my family had rehearsed their fears. They had repeated scarcity thoughts like there's never enough. Money is hard to come by. We have to be careful with money. I had to repeat abundance thoughts like there's more than enough. Money flows to those who create value. I manage money wisely and it multiplies. I had repeated caution behaviors like avoiding risk, playing it safe, choosing security over opportunity. I had to repeat courage behaviors like taking calculated risks, stepping out of my comfort zone, choosing growth over comfort. They had repeated hesitation patterns like procrastinating on financial decisions, doubting my ability to succeed, waiting for the perfect moment. I had to repeat decision patterns like taking action promptly, trusting in my ability to learn and adapt, recognizing that the perfect moment is now. They had rehearsed survival mindsets like focusing on getting by, living paycheck to paycheck, seeing money as something to be protected. I had to rehearse creation mindsets like focusing on getting ahead, building wealth, seeing money as something to be multiplied. Renewal was the deliberate act of replacing old echoes with new commands. It was the intentional process of creating new neural pathways, establishing new thought patterns, developing new behavioral habits. It was the conscious choice to think differently, act differently, be differently, until those new ways of thinking, acting, and being became automatic, unconscious, default. Let me share with you a specific practice that helped me engage in this deliberate repetition. I created what I called a daily renewal ritual, a structured practice of replacing old echoes with new commands. The daily renewal ritual consisted of several elements. Morning declarations. I would start each day by declaring my new identity, purpose, and reality. These declarations were stated in the present tense, as if they were already true. For example, I am the chosen one, breaking generational financial curses. I create abundance through wisdom and action. I am the bridge between my family's past limitations and future possibilities. Visualization practice. I would spend a few minutes each morning visualizing myself living from this new identity, fulfilling this purpose, creating this new reality. I would see myself making wise financial decisions, taking calculated risks, creating value, building wealth. Pattern interruption throughout the day. Whenever I noticed myself thinking an old scarcity thought or following an old limitation pattern, I would deliberately interrupt it and replace it with a new abundance thought or pattern. For example, if I caught myself thinking I can't afford that, I would replace it with how can I create the resources to afford that? Evening reflection. I would end each day by reflecting on instances where I successfully operated from my new identity and patterns, celebrating these successes and reinforcing them. I would also identify instances where I fell back into old patterns, not to criticize myself, but to learn and grow. Weekly review. Each week, I would review my progress, identifying patterns of growth and areas for further development. I would adjust my daily renewal ritual as needed, adding new declarations, visualizations, or pattern interruptions. This daily renewal ritual became a powerful tool in my process of deliberate repetition. It helped me replace old echoes with new commands, scarcity thoughts with abundance thoughts, limitation patterns with possibility patterns. It helped me shape my identity through repetition, creating new neural pathways that supported my transformation. Identity is shaped by repetition, and repetition is the secret instrument of rebirth. I had to rehearse new truth with the same devotion my family had rehearsed their fears. They had repeated scarcity. I had to repeat abundance. They had repeated caution. I had to repeat courage. They had repeated hesitation. I had to repeat decision. They had rehearsed survival. I had to rehearse creation. Renewal was the deliberate act of replacing old echoes with new commands. As my mind renewed, others began to respond to me differently. The anxious expressions softened. The hurried movements settled. The restless spirit quieted. My presence became more grounded, more confident, more deliberate. People felt the shift before I explained it. They sensed order where there was once confusion. They sensed strength where there was once strain. Renewal revealed itself long before wealth arrived. Opportunities that once walked past me unnoticed began to slow at my door. Ideas I once dismissed now struck me with unusual clarity. Conversations with others felt different. They no longer drained me, but inspired me. I began to speak less from fear and more from power. I acted less from doubt and more from instinct. Renewal did not whisper. It transformed. Let me elaborate on this profound observation that renewal reveals itself in our presence and influence, before it manifests in our external circumstances. Because understanding this phenomenon can provide encouragement and validation during the transformation process. For years, I had believed that the primary evidence of transformation would be external, increased income, reduced debt, growing savings, expanding investments. But I came to understand that the first evidence of renewal is internal, manifesting in our presence, our influence, our impact on others. As my mind renewed, others began to respond to me differently. The anxious expressions softened. The worried look in my eyes, the furrowed brow of concern, the tense facial muscles of financial stress, these began to relax as I embraced my new identity of abundance and possibility. I no longer carried the weight of financial fear in my expression, and others could see and feel the difference. The hurried movement settled. The frantic pace of someone trying to do too much. The rushed energy of someone operating from scarcity. The agitated movements of someone controlled by financial urgency, these began to calm as I embraced my new identity of purpose and strategy. I no longer moved with the energy of desperation, but with the calm confidence of someone aligned with divine purpose. The restless spirit quieted. The inner turmoil of someone wrestling with financial uncertainty, the mental agitation of someone struggling to find solutions. The emotional volatility of someone controlled by financial circumstances, these began to settle. As I embraced my new identity of calling and preparation, I no longer had the restless spirit of someone lost, but the centered spirit of someone found. My presence became more grounded, more confident, more deliberate. I stood taller, spoke more clearly, moved with more intention. I carried myself with the dignity of someone who understood their calling, confidence of someone who knew their purpose, the authority of someone who recognized their assignment. People felt the shift before I explained it. They sensed something different about me, even if they couldn't articulate what it was. They noticed a change in my energy, a difference in my demeanor, a transformation in my presence. They were drawn to the new me, even before they understood what had changed. They sensed order where there was once confusion. In the past, my financial life had been characterized by chaos, disorganized records, haphazard planning, reactive decision-making. But as my mind renewed, my financial life became more orderly, organized systems. Strategic planning, proactive decision-making. Others sensed this order, even if they couldn't see the specifics of my financial management. They sensed strength where there was once strain. In the past, my efforts had been characterized by strain, working hard but not effectively, striving but not progressing, pushing but not advancing. But as my mind renewed, my efforts became more effective, working smart, creating value, making progress. Others sensed this strength, even if they couldn't identify the source of it. Renewal revealed itself long before wealth arrived. The transformation of my mind, the shift in my identity, the change in my presence, these were evident to others long before my external financial circumstances changed significantly. The internal transformation preceded the external manifestation. The mindset shift preceded the material shift. The identity change preceded the circumstance change. Opportunities that once walked past me unnoticed began to slow at my door. In the past, I had been so focused on my limitations, so consumed by my challenges, so overwhelmed by my circumstances that I hadn't recognized opportunities that were available to me. But as my mind renewed, my awareness expanded, my perception sharpened, my recognition improved. I began to see possibilities that had previously been invisible to me. Ideas I once dismissed now struck me with unusual clarity. In the past, I had quickly rejected ideas that seemed too risky, too ambitious, too far beyond my current reality. But as my mind renewed, my creativity expanded, my imagination soared, my vision enlarged. I began to see potential in ideas that had previously seemed impossible. Conversations with others felt different. They no longer drained me, but inspired me. In the past, interactions about money had been filled with fear, limitation, and scarcity. But as my mind renewed, my conversations became filled with possibility, abundance, and creativity. I no longer avoided financial discussions, but welcomed them as opportunities for growth and contribution. I began to speak less from fear and more from power. In the past, my language had been filled with words like can't, impossible, difficult, risk. But as my mind renewed, my language became filled with words like can, possible, opportunity, potential. I no longer spoke from a position of limitation, but from a position of possibility. I acted less from doubt and more from instinct. In the past, my decisions had been paralyzed by doubt, uncertainty, and fear of making mistakes. But as my mind renewed, my decisions became guided by intuition, instinct, and inner knowing. I no longer hesitated to act, but moved forward with confidence and clarity. Renewal did not whisper, it transformed. It didn't just slightly adjust my thinking. It completely revolutionized my mindset. It didn't just modify my behavior. It totally transformed my identity. It didn't just improve my circumstances. It fundamentally altered my reality. This observation that renewal reveals itself in our presence and influence before it manifests in our external circumstances became a source of encouragement and validation during my transformation journey. When my external financial circumstances didn't change as quickly as I hoped, I could still recognize the evidence of transformation in my presence, my influence, my impact on others. When the material results seemed slow to arrive, I could still celebrate the internal shifts that were evident to me and to others. I also learned that this sequence, internal transformation before external manifestation, is the divine order of change. First the inside, then the outside. First the spiritual, then the material. First the mindset, then the circumstances. First the identity, then the reality. Understanding this sequence helped me trust the process, even when the external results weren't immediately visible. Renewal revealed itself long before wealth arrived. Opportunities that once walked past me unnoticed began to slow at my door. Ideas I once dismissed now struck me with unusual clarity. Conversations with others felt different. They no longer drained me, but inspired me. I began to speak less from fear and more from power. I acted less from doubt and more from instinct. Renewal did not whisper, it transformed. The covenant of purpose, definiteness of intention with a renewed mind. I moved to the next stage, the covenant of purpose. I had witnessed more lives ruined by drifting than by failure. A failure can be corrected. Drifting cannot. For drifting is the slow surrender of the soul. A man does not lose his destiny in a single day. He leaks it through years of indecision. And nothing binds a man to mediocrity more tightly than the absence of purpose. Purpose is the anchor of destiny, and without it, the strongest mind becomes weak. A man chosen to break the financial chains of his lineage cannot walk without direction. He must not leave his fate to chance, nor his future to moods, nor his fortune to hope. He must forge a covenant, a sacred agreement between himself, his purpose, and the law that governs all achievement. This covenant is not spoken lightly. For once formed, it becomes the guiding fire of a man's life. Let me take you deeper into this crucial stage of forging a covenant of purpose, because understanding and creating this sacred agreement is essential to breaking generational financial curses. After renewing my mind and transforming my identity, I recognized that without a clear, definite purpose, all this internal transformation would not necessarily lead to external results. I needed a direction, a focus, a specific target for my renewed energy and transformed mindset. I had witnessed more lives ruined by drifting than by failure. I had seen people with talent, with resources, with opportunities, but without purpose, drift through life without making significant impact. I had observed individuals with potential, with capability, with possibility, but without direction, settle for mediocrity rather than striving for excellence. A failure can be corrected. Failure is often a teacher, showing us what doesn't work, pointing us toward a better approach, providing valuable feedback for improvement. Failure can be analyzed, learned from, overcome. Many successful people have experienced significant failures on their journey to achievement. Drifting cannot. Drifting is the slow surrender of the soul, the gradual erosion of potential, the progressive diminishment of possibility. Drifting doesn't provide clear feedback or obvious lessons. It's a gradual fading, a subtle diminishing, quiet relinquishing of destiny that happens so slowly it's barely noticeable until it's too late. A man does not lose his destiny in a single day. He leaks it through years of indecision. Each moment of hesitation, each opportunity postponed, each decision avoided. These are small leaks that, over time, drain away the possibility of fulfillment. Each compromise with mediocrity, each accommodation to limitation, each acceptance of the status quo, these are tiny fissures that, over time, become cracks in the foundation of destiny. And nothing binds a man to mediocrity more tightly than the absence of purpose. Without a clear purpose, a man is at the mercy of circumstances, controlled by external conditions, influenced by the opinions of others. Without a definite purpose, a man lacks the focus needed to concentrate his energy, the motivation needed to persist through challenges, the direction needed to guide his decisions. Purpose is the anchor of destiny, and without it, the strongest mind becomes weak. A mind, no matter how renewed, transformed, or powerful, needs a purpose to direct its energy, focus its attention, guide its decisions. Without purpose, even the most capable mind wanders, dissipates its energy, loses its effectiveness. A man chosen to break the financial chains of his lineage cannot walk without direction. He must have a clear understanding of where he's going, what he's trying to achieve, what specific outcomes he's working toward. He must have a definite purpose that guides his decisions, focuses his efforts, and sustains his motivation. He must not leave his fate to chance, nor his future to moods, nor his fortune to hope. Chance is unreliable, moods are unpredictable, and hope without action is powerless. A man chosen for such a significant task must take responsibility for his destiny, must be intentional about his future, must be strategic about his fortune. He must forge a covenant, a sacred agreement between himself, his purpose, and the law that governs all achievement. This covenant is not just a goal or a resolution. It's a deep, binding commitment that aligns his entire being with his purpose. It's a sacred contract that activates divine laws and principles in his favor. This covenant is not spoken lightly. It's not made casually, without thought or consideration. It's not entered into lightly, without understanding the commitment involved. For once formed, it becomes the guiding fire of a man's life. The North Star that guides his decisions, the foundation that supports his actions, the source of his strength and motivation. Let me share with you the specific process I went through to forge my covenant of purpose, because understanding and applying this process can help you create your own sacred agreement with destiny. The first step was clarification of purpose. I asked myself questions like, what specific financial transformation am I called to create in my family? What generational curses am I called to break? What generational blessings am I called to establish? What is the exact financial destiny I'm committed to creating? I spent time in prayer, meditation, and reflection, seeking divine guidance and clarity about my specific purpose. The second step was quantification of purpose. I recognized that a vague purpose like becoming financially free was not powerful enough to create transformation. I needed to be specific, measurable, and time-bound. I defined exactly what financial freedom meant to me, what specific financial targets I was committed to achieving, and by when I was committed to achieving them. The third step was documentation of purpose. I wrote down my covenant of purpose in detail, making it clear, specific, and compelling. I included not just what I was committed to achieving, but why I was committed to achieving it, connecting my purpose to my deeper values and motivations. The fourth step was declaration of purpose. I spoke my covenant of purpose aloud with conviction, authority, and emotion. I declared it not just to myself, but to the universe, to divine intelligence, to the laws that govern achievement. I made it a sacred declaration, a binding commitment, a solemn vow. The fifth step was daily reinforcement of purpose. I reviewed my covenant of purpose daily, reminding myself of my commitment, reconnecting with my motivation, realigning my energy and focus. I used it as the foundation for my daily decisions, the guide for my priorities, the measure of my progress. Through this process, I forged a covenant of purpose that became the guiding fire of my life. It provided the direction I needed to channel my renewed energy, the focus I needed to concentrate my efforts, the motivation I needed to persist through challenges. It aligned me with divine laws and principles, activated spiritual forces in my favor, and created a magnetic attraction to the resources, opportunities, and connections I needed to fulfill my purpose. In my studies, I saw that every man who rose from obscurity to greatness made one defining decision. Not a wish, not a preference, a decision. That decision marked the dividing line between the life behind him and the life ahead. Until that decision was made, his world drifted. After it was made, his world aligned. I remembered the story of Dr. Frank Gonzalez, who wanted to build a college for the children of the poor. For years he wished for the funds. He dreamed of them. He imagined them. But nothing changed until he delivered a sermon declaring that he would secure $1 million. The world laughed at him. Yet within days, a benefactor placed the money in his hands. The decision came first, the supply came second. That was the secret most men never learn. A covenant of purpose is not a statement. It is a spiritual contract. When you write your aim clearly, when you read it with conviction, when you recite it daily, you bind your mind to your destiny. Your subconscious accepts the command. Infinite intelligence arranges the conditions. People appear, circumstances shift, opportunities gather, providence steps forward to meet you. Let me expand on this powerful insight that decision precedes supply, that a defining decision marks the dividing line between a life of drifting and a life of purpose, because understanding and applying this principle can accelerate your transformation dramatically. In my studies of those who had achieved extraordinary success, I noticed a common pattern. Every man who rose from obscurity to greatness made one defining decision. Not a wish, not a preference, not a hope, but a decision. A decision is different from a wish in several crucial ways. A wish is passive, dependent on external forces, subject to the whims of circumstance. A decision is active, taking responsibility for outcomes, shaping circumstances rather than being shaped by them. A wish is vague, undefined, lacking specific targets and timelines. A decision is precise, specific, with clear objectives and deadlines. A wish is conditional, dependent on favorable conditions, limited by perceived constraints. A decision is unconditional, committed regardless of circumstances, transcending perceived limitations. A wish is temporary, fading when enthusiasm wanes, disappearing when challenges arise. A decision is permanent, persisting through difficulties, overcoming obstacles. That decision marked the dividing line between the life behind him and the life ahead. Before the decision, there was drifting, uncertainty, lack of direction. After the decision, there was purpose, clarity, focused action. Before the decision, there was reaction to circumstances, adaptation to conditions, response to external forces. After the decision, there was creation of circumstances, shaping of conditions, initiation of action. Until that decision was made, his world drifted. Without a clear decision, a man is like a ship without a rudder, tossed about by the winds and waves of circumstance. Without a definite decision, a life lacks direction, focus, and momentum. Without a committed decision, a person is at the mercy of external conditions rather than the master of their destiny. After it was made, his world aligned. Once a clear decision is made, forces seen and unseen begin to conspire in support of that decision. Resources begin to flow toward the decision. Opportunities begin to open up around the decision. Connections begin to form in alignment with the decision. The world seems to reorganize itself to support a committed decision. I remembered the story of Dr. Frank Gonzalez, who wanted to build a college for the children of the poor. For years he wished for the funds. He dreamed of them. He imagined them. He hoped for them, but nothing changed. His wishing, dreaming, imagining, and hoping, while positive, were not powerful enough to create the transformation he desired. But then he delivered a sermon declaring that he would secure $1 million. This wasn't just a wish or a hope. It was a decision. It was a definitive declaration of intention, a binding commitment to a specific outcome, a sacred covenant with his purpose. The world laughed at him. His declaration seemed audacious, impossible, unrealistic. His decision appeared foolish, naive, delusional, but within days, a benefactor placed the money in his hands. The decision came first, the supply came second. That was the secret most men never learn. This story illustrates a fundamental principle of achievement. Decision precedes supply. The universe doesn't respond to wishes. It responds to decisions. Divine intelligence doesn't align with hopes. It aligns with commitments. Infinite intelligence doesn't arrange conditions for preferences. It arranges conditions for definite decisions. A covenant of purpose is not a statement. It is a spiritual contract. It's not just words on paper or thoughts in the mind. It's a binding agreement that activates spiritual laws and principles. It's a sacred covenant that aligns your entire being with your purpose, that mobilizes unseen forces in your favor, that creates a magnetic attraction to the resources and opportunities you need. When you write your aim clearly, when you read it with conviction, when you recite it daily, you bind your mind to your destiny. You create a neural pathway in your brain that makes your purpose your dominant thought. You establish a frequency in your consciousness that attracts everything in alignment with that frequency. You develop a focus that filters out distractions and concentrates on what matters. Your subconscious accepts the command. Your subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's vividly imagined. When you consistently feed it a clear, definite command, accepts it as reality, and works to make it manifest in your external world, it becomes your silent partner, your unseen assistant, your automatic mechanism for achieving your purpose. Infinite intelligence arranges the conditions. The universal intelligence that governs all creation responds to definite decisions, clear intentions, committed purposes. It begins to arrange people, circumstances, events, and resources in support of your decision. It orchestrates coincidences, synchronicities, and serendipities that move you toward your goal. People appear, circumstances shift, opportunities gather, providence steps forward to meet you. Once you make a definite decision, you'll find that the right people begin to show up in your life: mentors, partners, supporters, collaborators. You'll notice that circumstances begin to shift in your favor. Obstacles are removed. Paths are cleared. Doors are opened. You'll discover that opportunities begin to gather around you: ideas, insights, possibilities that align with your purpose. You'll experience providence stepping forward to meet you, unexpected blessings, timely interventions, divine assistance. Let me share with you a specific example of how this principle operated in my own life. After renewing my mind and transforming my identity, I forged a covenant of purpose that included a specific financial target I was committed to achieving within a specific time frame. This was not just a wish or a hope. It was a definite decision, a binding commitment, a sacred covenant. Initially, the gap between my current reality and my desired outcome seemed enormous, almost impossible to bridge. I had no clear idea how I would achieve this target, what specific steps I would take, what resources I would need. But I had made a decision, and I trusted the principle that decision precedes supply. In the weeks and months that followed, I began to notice remarkable coincidences and synchronicities. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out with unexpected opportunities. Books I happened to pick up contained exactly the information I needed at that moment. Conversations I overheard provided solutions to problems I had been wrestling with. Resources I needed became available just when I needed them. One particularly significant example was when I was introduced to a mentor who had achieved exactly the kind of financial transformation I was committed to creating. This introduction happened through a series of seemingly random events that, in retrospect, were clearly orchestrated. This mentor provided guidance, connections, and opportunities that dramatically accelerated my progress. Looking back, I can see clearly that my decision activated spiritual laws and principles that arranged conditions in my favor. My covenant of purpose created a magnetic attraction to the people, circumstances, and resources I needed to fulfill my purpose. My definite decision bound my mind to my destiny and mobilized infinite intelligence to support my journey. The decision came first. The supply came second. That was the secret most men never learn. A covenant of purpose is not a statement. It is a spiritual contract. When you write your aim clearly, when you read it with conviction, when you recite it daily, you bind your mind to your destiny. Your subconscious accepts the command. Infinite intelligence arranges the conditions. People appear, circumstances shift, opportunities gather, providence steps forward to meet you. Definiteness of purpose. The power of single-pointed focus. I knew my covenant had to be definite. No man can hold two directions in the same hand. Indecision divides the mind, and a divided mind accomplishes nothing. A man cannot rise while arguing with himself. He cannot win while negotiating with fear. He cannot prosper while questioning his own worth. The covenant of purpose strips all contradiction from the soul and leaves a single, unbreakable intention. When I wrote my purpose, I wrote it with reverence. I wrote it as though I were kneeling before the highest law of life, declaring who I was and what I would become. This was no ordinary writing. This was consecration. This was the act that separates the chosen from the average, the determined from the drifting, the destined from the defeated. Let me take you deeper into this principle of definiteness of purpose, because understanding and applying it is essential to breaking generational financial curses and creating lasting transformation. After recognizing the importance of a covenant of purpose, I discovered that the effectiveness of this covenant depends on its definiteness, its clarity, specificity, and singleness of focus. I knew my covenant had to be definite. Vague intentions like becoming financially successful or breaking generational curses lack the power to create transformation. They're too general, too undefined, too open to interpretation. They don't provide the clear direction, focused energy, specific guidance needed to overcome obstacles and achieve breakthrough. No man can hold two directions in the same hand. Trying to pursue multiple conflicting purposes simultaneously divides our energy, diffuses our focus, and weakens our effectiveness. It's like trying to travel to two different destinations at the same time. We end up going nowhere meaningful. Indecision divides the mind, and a divided mind accomplishes nothing. When we're torn between different possibilities, uncertain about which path to take, hesitant about which direction to follow, our mental energy becomes scattered, our decision-making becomes paralyzed, and our actions become ineffective. A man cannot rise while arguing with himself. Internal conflict between our desires and our beliefs, between our goals and our fears, between our aspirations and our self-perceptions creates a resistance that holds us down, keeps us stuck, prevents us from rising to our potential. You cannot win while negotiating with fear. Trying to pursue our purpose while constantly negotiating with our fears is like trying to drive with the emergency brake on. We might make some progress, but it will be slow, difficult, and exhausting. The fear that we negotiate with today becomes the limitation we experience tomorrow. He cannot prosper while questioning his own worth. Pursuing financial abundance while harboring feelings of unworthiness creates a fundamental contradiction that undermines our efforts. We may take actions that should lead to prosperity, but our underlying belief that we don't deserve success will sabotage those efforts, often in subtle and unconscious ways. The covenant of purpose strips all contradiction from the soul and leaves a single, unbreakable intention. It resolves internal conflicts, aligns our desires with our beliefs, harmonizes our aspirations with our self-perceptions. It creates a unity of purpose that concentrates our energy, focuses our attention, and amplifies our effectiveness. When I wrote my purpose, I wrote it with reverence. I recognized that this was not just a goal-setting exercise or a planning activity. This was a sacred act, a spiritual ceremony, a divine consecration. I approached it with the seriousness, respect, and devotion it deserved. I wrote it as though I were kneeling before the highest law of life, declaring who I was and what I would become. I wasn't just writing words on paper. I was making a declaration to the universe, to divine intelligence, to the laws that govern achievement. I wasn't just setting a target. I was aligning myself with my destiny. This was no ordinary writing. This was consecration. I was setting apart my purpose as sacred, dedicating my life to its fulfillment, committing my entire being to its achievement. I was sanctifying my journey, hallowing my transformation, making holy my assignment. This was the act that separates the chosen from the average, the determined from the drifting, the destined from the defeated. The average person has wishes, hopes, and preferences. The chosen one has a definite